Hey guys, it's Eric from foundersbeta.com, and I'm delighted to have the co-founders of BioBox. Thanks so much for joining, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Eric. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm
Great to
very
be here.
excited to hear about your stories and what you're working on. So maybe let's go around and introduce yourselves and tell us more about the projects.
For sure. So my name is Christopher Lee. I'm co-founder and CEO of BioBox Analytics. Our company, we're building an end-to-end data analytics platform for scientists and clinicians working with genomic data.
Great. And how did you guys go about, meeting your team? Like, how did it come about?
Yeah, so I mean, the early days was definitely a very interesting time. Julian, Hamza, and myself, we've known each other for, gosh, like 5-6 years now, working together on various projects. And I think it's important, like, to kind of talk a little bit about like what the problem space was and what drove us to build this company. When we first met at the time, we were graduate students working in life sciences research in the labs. And, with the way that life science research is right now, one of the major technologies kind of brought about this tectonic change in the space is next generation sequencing, generating genomic data. But the advantages of this type of technology is drove like unprecedented kind of discoveries in life science research. But the problem is it generates this issue where you need to know some computational skills to work with this type of big data, to design algorithms to process this data. Now this creates kind of like two sides of the fence. You have your wet lab scientists who are on the lab bench doing physical experiments. And you have your dry lab scientists who are working on crunching the numbers to kind of analyze the data. There's a lot fewer dry lab scientists than there are wet lab scientists. So at the time, myself and Hamza and Julian, we were more on the hybrid kind of walking on both sides of the fence. And that generates this issue where, you have your wet lab scientist that needs the data to get processed. And they're kind of collaborating with the dry lab guys. But there's a lot fewer of those. And then now 95% of our time was helping other people's projects, which we were happy to do because that's why science works, is the nature of collaboration. But a lot of the times it becomes challenging for the dry lab guys to manage that kind of multiple projects. And at the same time, it's really frustrating for wet lab scientists to have to do this back and forth with the dry lab team. So one day after work, the three of us were at a bar across the street from work getting some drinks. And when the beer started flowing, we started to kind of talk about these issues. And we said, okay, let's draw out on a napkin what a hypothetical system could be to solve this. And that's really kind of where I guess the nucleus of BioBox really was seeded.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's always a challenge. It's like you pick that problem, and it sounds like it was like you experienced this, right? So like when you were working on this.
Oh yeah, I mean, this was our day-to-day life. I mean, Hamza was working on a much larger team and multiple projects compared to me. I was more focused on my own, and Julian was actually on the service side of things for the entire hospital. So they can definitely shed.
So we all bonded over the same problem, but we had different perspectives on it.
Right.
So I saw it from the perspective of a lab full of dry lab bioinformaticians and the problems they were facing. And Hamza and Chris saw the same issues from more of the biological side.
Right. So I think it's great because you guys have complementary skill set, right? So, because I think that's one of the keys in building up the team, right, Hamza? What are your thoughts on this?
I completely agree with that. I think the way we got together was very serendipitous as well. Just like Julian said, he's more on the tech infrastructure basis, so he's heard all the problems and complaints from that aspect of biology. Chris has had a very personal experience being like encountering these issues from within his own lab, and just given the structure of the way my lab was before, I've heard like every possible iteration of a different biologist, from a novice to an intermediate, trying to tackle a question, getting into problems, trying to set up collaborations, which is a huge problem as well, in terms of time for a scientist or a graduate student, because you only have so much limited time to give away to doing these projects, and there's only so much you can learn. So collaborations is the key to get through, but it always takes away from your primary project. So I think that night where we were discussing it, we were just hashing out, well, I see these in daily life, you see
Right.
this, Julian
Right.
sees this, and we could see that systemic, like these all seem to originate from the same key sources. So why don't we just solve these key sources? And then we can't be the only people experiencing it. Like from our own evidence, that's not the case.
Right.
So we could build it not just for us, but for everybody else who's suffering the same way.
Nice. So what was the next step after that conversation that night? Was it Christopher, you know, the next day he's like, guys, let's get this going, or what happened next?
Yeah, I mean, the next thing was we had, after the pictures, we were like, hey, let's find a cool company name. So we're actually hunting for domains.
Right.
That's honestly
That's the hardest part, right? Because every good name is taken. Like, what the hell?
You don't want to hear the first couple iterations. It was so bad.
Right.
But we settled on BioBox. And then we kind of came back to the drawing board the next day and was like, hey guys, like, you know, let's take a serious crack at this.
Right.
But at the time we were really tied up with other work, so it was kind of iced for a little bit. But then that's the thing about startups, right? Like this was an idea, and then it really grew into like a passion. When it's a passion, you can't really escape it. Like you're thinking about it when you're not working. You're thinking about it when you're working. You can't go to sleep because you're thinking about cool things. I would call these guys, I would message them like, hey, what if we did this instead? Like those kind of things.
Right.
And eventually we decided to take the leap of faith and said, look, we got to do this, because we had sent out a prototype to some of our colleagues, just as a fun side project, and they loved it. And we were like, okay, like if this is a real kind of use case, we decided, you know, let's leave our current positions and come at this full time. And that was around April of 2019.
Wow, that's amazing. So talk about the validation. Like you just came up with you built some kind of prototype. What was the next step? Did you go to you send it to the labs? Did you talk with them? Did they start using it? What was the first, what was it like?
Yeah, so, I mean, the challenges there were we need to build an end-to-end solution. So as an enterprise application, you need to cover a lot of ground.
Right.
And it's not a place where you can really make mistakes, especially in this type of industry, because you know, if you make a mistake here, config is bad here, data is not reproducible, the consequences are very serious, especially when it comes to research integrity. So we pretty much were developing in stealth. We had a couple alpha users who, you know, were testing it in the early days to kind of give us feedback. Engaging the research community is very important to us, because at the end of the day, we're trying to build a tool that would help them in their own work. So that's where we were in the initial kind of year or so. And since then, right now, we're working with we're with a wait list before our imminent kind of V1 launch that's coming out. So stay tuned for those. And
exciting.
If you jump on the wait list, we'd be happy to kind of send you more info.
Exciting, super exciting.
Yeah.
And what was
just one more thing to add about initial demos. So in the early days, we basically would demo to our existing lab mates, and feedback was always positive. They liked the features, but what was even more exciting was their own ideas for features to add to the platform.
Right. And
so that really helped us propel along this energy of, you know, we're doing this and people want this, and like we really want to make this. And I think here's the thing, like so how did you go about like trying to implement those features? Because I know sometimes, you know, you send it to the user, they're like, oh, get me this and that, but guess what, that's going to take us like 10 months and we don't have any budget, right? Like how did you go about like try to prioritize, be like, yeah, you know, that is something we got to have on the product, or maybe not now but maybe later, or actually not at all? How did you decide about like what to include in the product down the road or what not to include?
I think a good degree in that is a balancing act. We looked at the market outlook and we looked at our own experiences as well as with labs we're trying to solve the problem for first, and what would solve most of their problems, right? It's 20% of the work gives you 80% of the value, but those 20% actually still a lot of work. So we design our own internal product timeline and then estimate how long different features will take. And then we balance that with, well, would users, especially the users that we are trying to solve for first, would this be beneficial for them? And the ones that align are the direction that we start building all of these products for. Ones that are kind of out of scope but would be super cool, even though we'd want to build that right now, and we try building that like late at night or early in the
Right.
mornings, those aren't really what solves the problem we initially set out to build. So it becomes a balance between what we think is possible to build within a certain timeline and which ones, based on feedback, would actually be beneficial and what the users want, and then try and find a happy like symbiosis.
Right, right. That makes sense, right? Because I think for like founders too, like we get excited, right? Like you're so excited about this, but I mean, like also have to be realistic about the resources you have. You know, you have a very small team. You have maybe very one developer. You know, does everything. Like it's hard, right? But I think, like you said, I think figuring out the balance between what delivers the most value to the users, but also based on your resources as well. And also, I think as a founder, you feel like confident in the product too, because I think that's also the key. Because if like I don't feel confident, then not good, right? Like I have to go back and like be like, yeah, you know, this is it. So I think that's always hard because it's like you're trying to figure out so many things and also push it out and something that the users can use but also love because they can go back keep using it. So I definitely know how that feels. So
I think another really important lesson for us was, especially in the beginning when we were just doing free flow ideas, we had ideas like, I think one of mine was like, oh, we should have something like Jarvis. You just talk to it and it'll figure everything out. But there's a big
right,
difference between
right.
ideas and then when you have simple ideas and you actually have to sit down and break it into pieces of work that you can get done,
Mhm.
you really realize just how a small feature is such a large endeavor, and that helped humble us with where we're going to spend our engineering time, because there's
Right.
only a limited set of features that you can realistically implement. Even though you have grandiose ideas, that's a marathon. You're going to
Mhm.
eventually build to it. Let's build it in steps where people are gaining value every single time.
Right, right. That's great. So yeah. So what's the next? What's the next thing for BioBox, or like, what's your vision? Where do you want to go?
Yeah, great question. And at the core of our company, we came from the scientific community, and we decided to do this because we wanted to provide a tool that can help some of our colleagues, or even basically we're building a tool that we would have wanted when we were kind of
Right.
in that stage, right?
Mm.
So the vision right now, in the near term, is to just get the product to deliver as much value and get it in the hands of scientists, as many scientists as we can, to really kind of solve these critical challenges that we're facing in scientific research. And we go into science with a lot of ambition. We want to actually do meaningful work, and we're doing that every single day. But the thing is, time is always a critical constraint, not just from budget, not just from how much time you have left before you have to graduate, not just from grants. It's the problems that they're solving, like cancer research, like virology, those kind of things. They have real consequences, and we need this kind of research to improve just our understanding of diseases, our understanding of therapeutics, to help solve real challenges in the world. So our short-term vision right now is to make sure that we can get the product out as stable, as reliable, as reproducible, and as easy to use, so that scientists can really incorporate our platform into the work. In the long term, we want to actually engage some higher education programs. Like we're currently piloting with a few courses at UT right now, but have this platform be a means to kind of train the next generation of scientists, right? To be able to provide another dimension to their education and their academic training, so that when they emerge into the research field as professionals, they can kind of hit the ground running, just to accelerate science as fast as we can using our platform.
Right, right. Super exciting. Love the part about the next generation of scientists. So I think this is going to be incredibly great because it's great impact, right? So was there any challenges you face as a biotech startup when you trying to get it out, or any specific maybe industry challenges or something you face? You're like, yeah, this is something we overcome.
I think one of the biggest challenges, not necessarily for biotech startup, but just for a startup in general, was finding out how to have a healthy work-life balance.
Right.
A lot of time in the early days was spent just just going full gas, weekends, nights, all these things to try to get the V1 product. And really that can't be sustained forever. So definitely, I think we've all improved and we all help each other along this way. As you know, as founders, a bit more work is expected of us. We have to, it's not just a 9 to 5.
Exactly.
Once work is over, it's done. It really is an all-time job, but we have to find how to keep a healthy work-life balance. Personally, I find that having strict rules, like one day on the weekend is always no work, helps, but we all have our own approaches.
Right. That's such a key, especially right now. It's more like a work-life blend, right? Because especially you're working from home, there's no boundaries anymore. It's like, oh man, like it's just like you don't even know when you're working. So I agree. It's like setting up, setting up some kind of routine or something. Was there anything other things that helps you? Maybe Christopher, anything that helps you try to balance it out with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I think, as founders, like Julian said, it's tough because it's a passion project. You kind of always, you're always almost like magnetically attracted to it, like every day.
Right.
You're watching a movie and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this would be a cool idea. Let me like write that down or start coding or something like that. And I was laughing earlier because, there was a time when, we were working out of my 1-bedroom apartment because we didn't have an office. I would wake Julian up at like 7 in the morning or 6 in the morning when we would do like overnighters and stuff like that.
Right.
First thing he would taste is Red Bull because
Oh
we were like, okay, we gotta go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right,
and like
right.
and we were eating ramen like every day.
Oh no. Oh shoot. Right.
But one of the things that I've recently been doing to improve my work-life balance is to not just isolate time, but also to make use of that time to invest in my personal relationships with family, with friends.
Right.
Because I think every founder can attest to this, that at some point you're going to face rough patches. It's not like, everything is always going to be smooth.
Right.
In those rough patches, you need a strong support network to really keep you afloat, to keep your mental health like stable, really.
Right. Exactly.
And when you're always working 7 days a week nonstop, you're not attending to these personal relationships.
Right.
When the time comes that you're in these rough patches, it's really the strength of your friends and family that can give you that support that can keep you going.
100%. I agree with you. I think it's all about the support system, having that support system, but also one thing that really helps too. I recently noticed while I was like, chatting with some founders is actually talking to other founders, which is quite useful too, because you can relate to so many things that, I'm going through, right? Because maybe you're 6 months ahead, but you see the challenges, right?
Startup therapy.
Yeah, so it's all about that support system, right? So get that fired up and like have it. So just in case you need to have a call, you need to get yourself fired up about what you're doing, because I think also motivation wise too, is always a challenge, right? We're grinding out in the early days. It's just like, it's hard to get those results in because it takes months. But I think that's something, like you said, it's all about the support system. Great. Let's move on to the next question. So what's the best advice you ever gotten? I always ask our speakers, life, philosophy, startups. Yeah.
Hamza's our in-house guru.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Hamza.
I think I've gotten quite a bit. I've been lucky to have like very supportive mentors throughout my career, whether it was undergrad, graduate school, postgrad. But I think the advice that really stuck with me is the same advice that my previous mentor received from their mentor, which was no matter what you're doing in life, the most valuable asset you can have is your time. So make sure you use every second of every day. Because it wasn't said in the fact of you need to gain some kind of activity or work for every single second, but don't use it on something that you don't really care about, or don't use it on something that doesn't make you happy or isn't good for you long. Because a lot of the time we'll be stuck, especially back when we were doing our graduate school, a systemic thing we see is these PhD programs take 6, 7, 8 years, where people are just dragging on projects where they really don't have that drive anymore, and they're not happy with their day-to-day work.
Right.
The advice was given, in fact, of if you have a specific goal you're going to, Plan out how you want to approach it. Make every second count, including taking seconds to just relax, to build personal relationships, to just
Right.
disconnect, to get your work done to a point where you need to, so that the 5 years you're spending now is 5 years you won't regret a single bit of. And I think that advice really stuck to me, whether it was before starting BioBox, during starting BioBox, going through it the past year and a half, and makes you value and appreciate everything you've experienced in the entire time.
Awesome. That's great. Julian, any thoughts on that? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. So back in the early days of BioBox, back when we were still working out of the apartment, one of my friends who also has his own startup, and at that time he was, significantly ahead in terms of had received funding and was already working with customers. And I sort of jokingly asked him, like, so you're successful. Is it get easier? And his response was no. If anything, it's more difficult. Startup life gets harder. And so I always remember that, to humble myself and remember that the grind is always going to be the same. And so really it's just a matter of focusing on healthy mental health, work-life balance, and maximizing your throughput. And remembering that it's always an uphill battle, but that's fine because that's the challenge and we signed up for it, and the reward is well worth it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why it's so exciting. I think it's all about the journey, right? So that's great. So I think, Christopher, you mentioned you're always building your team, and are you looking like, what do you look for in your new hires?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's also a little nuanced because of our space, our industry.
Right.
So, if finding a talented developer is already hard, finding a talented developer who also understands biology is a near impossible.
Right.
So, we look, but the thing is, you can't expect someone to come to the table with that. So what we really look for the most when we're looking at new team members is, your flexibility and your agility of learning new things. So I'm less interested about things like hardcore technical skills. I can cover X amount of languages. I can cover X amount of cases. It's more about like, okay, how do you approach problem solving? How do you think? Can you reason well, and can you convince me of a difficult topic, right? So, a lot of the times in startup in general, we're solving challenges that there likely isn't a solution for, right? So you have to approach these problems in creative ways. Now, these are complex problems. So we're looking for someone, who can articulate the problem clearly, can articulate their solution and their implementation strategy. And that's really something that, you can't read from a resume. It really is talking with them, understanding how they think, understanding why they have chose to attack certain problems in certain ways. And that's the defining quality, I think, amongst our teammates right now, is a very innovative and creative thinking pattern that allows us to come to the table with solutions that often work better than what we in isolation could have achieved.
Right. Because I think being resourceful is a key, because oftentimes you're facing problems hasn't been faced. So it's not like I can read a manual, right?
Exactly.
And I know some founders, they call it somebody who can figure things out as they go, right? It's a good way to put it, because you really have to figure it out as you go. But I think resourceful as well, like you mentioned, I think those are some great traits that I think it's needed to survive in this kind of environment, survive and thrive actually too. So both, because as you get bigger, as you build your product, more exciting developments. So, but also new challenges too that comes with it. So the challenges, you have today won't be the same, maybe 6 months later, right? So I think it's great to have that, team members. Yeah.
It really starts to like shine and kick into overdrive when we have these challenges come up and everyone has to wear multiple hats. Like, it's just the nature of early stage startup. You're gonna have to do, you may, like, for example, our marketing director, Zoe,
right.
When she jumped on, I was like, hey, by the way, can you also build a website too? Right. And now she's like almost like an engineer.
Right, exactly.
Something on the side, right? Those kind of things, being able to open to tackling new challenges, is definitely a really, really strong quality.
Right. 100%. Great. Go ahead.
I think the other key feature of our team as well is everybody's trying to build BioBox in their own special unique way. So everybody's approaching and trying to contribute what they imagine BioBox will be in the future. And
Right.
it's a really defining feature for anybody who adds on to our team, because one, it brings passion into the work. It brings that key focus of this is what I want, and I want to reflect on this and see it coming out in the future. And it helps. It's a kind of a quicker way of figuring out if somebody can figure things out as they go. Because people are passionate about what they want to do, they'll find a way to do what they need to.
Right. Great. So for our audience that want to learn more about BioBox, where can they go?
So you can follow us at any one of our socials. We're on Instagram, Facebook, on LinkedIn. For more information in general, or to sign up for our waitlist, you can go to biobox.io and browse our product offerings, our sign-up sheet, just chat with us. You're also more than welcome to reach out to any one of us. We're on LinkedIn and just add us and shoot us a message. We're more than happy to take questions, to give advice, so on. And
awesome. That's great.
Yeah, so that's at BioBox Analytics on Twitter and Instagram.
Great. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming out and sharing your story with our audience. And yeah, we can't wait to see the next development for BioBox, and we're super excited to have you on board today. So thanks again, guys.
Thanks for having us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.